Welcome back, y'all. This is the Bluechip Breakdown, and I'm your host, Bull. Happy Monday to you. This will not be a typical Monday or even a typical week on this channel because our Tennessee Vols are on a bye. We'll still have plenty of Tennessee coverage throughout the entire week. But in today's video, it'll be a little bit more national. I want to break down my top 10 college football teams up to, this point in the season, heading into week 5. And I broke this thing down really based off of who I feel like can operate in this new 12-team playoff. And I know some people don't like it because each individual game doesn't mean as much maybe as it did in the past, especially, based off of the conference that you're playing in, your strength of schedule, all that good stuff. But I think that it could look a little bit more like the NFL playoff model where, man, the NFL playoffs is the most intense version of football, period, point blank. And it should be fun because we'll get to see some different matchups, things like that. And that NFL playoff model is based off of what teams get hot at the right time heading into the playoffs. Who can do those little things, really just basic fundamental football. It's all about that front seven. It's always going to be about front seven. Whose front seven is being dominant? Can you run the football? Can you stop the run? And will your style of play translate to different climates throughout the entire country? And I also wouldn't be surprised to see if you, clinch a conference title berth, or maybe for some of these programs, even a playoff berth, if, for those final couple of games in the season, if you don't rest your starters, build up that depth for the playoffs and also for the future of your program. So things will look a whole lot different. But, again, I feel like it's going to be a whole lot of fun. So as always, y'all, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, number 10 for me is going to be Utah. So far, they had the number 59th ranked strength of schedule, and they beat Southern Utah, Baylor, Utah State, and Oklahoma State last weekend. That game was in Stillwater, and Utah was able to win with their backup quarterback. So we'll touch on that here in just a second. They also have a remaining strength of schedule of number 51. So the schedule should get a little bit more difficult for them. We'll see how they do with those tests and challenges as the rest of this season goes on. But what I like about Utah is that they're big, they're strong, they're physical up front, which is why they can go on the road with the backup quarterback and still win, still play their brand of football. That's really big. I think that their style of play can translate in any climate, things like that. But the biggest question is going to be, what can they do whenever teams stack the box, right? If you put 7, 8 inside the box and force them to win on the outside, that's where Utah's really going to struggle at because they don't have a whole lot of team speed. They are big, they're strong, they're fast, they're physical. I would actually say that Utah is exactly what the Big Ten has tried to make us believe Iowa's been for all these years. Iowa really ain't that, but Utah is. So I think they can find some success if the matchup is a little bit more favorable for them. But really, man, in the playoffs, they're going to have to control the, clock a whole lot, hold on to the football, score on pretty much every single possession, get some turnovers, things like that for them to have a realistic shot, I think, to actually win because some of these more talented teams will be able to load the box up on Utah and force them to win on the outside. I just don't think that they're going to be able to do that versus some of these big boy teams. Number 9 is Penn State. They had the number 104th ranked strength of schedule. So far, they beat West Virginia, Bowling Green, and Kent State. And their remaining strength of schedule is number 28. So theirs is going to get a whole lot harder as, in these upcoming weeks. But I do like Penn State, especially if they can find themselves in the playoffs, because we know that James Franklin and Penn State will do a good job of running the football and stopping the run. Kind of the same thing here, just as far as a question mark for me, is can they establish a wide receiver on the outside to win in man-to-man coverage? So far, their leading, receiving threat is a tight end. So can they find that player? Now, they may already have him on their roster, and their quarterback is actually doing a much better job this year. Now, he doesn't have a whole bunch of yards. They are very, very heavy in running the football first, but he's taking care of the football. He is completing passes at 70%. He has 8 touchdowns to 1 interception. And their quarterback will also be a dual threat guy. They're going to use him in that running game. I think that's always difficult for coordinators on defense to game plan for. So they have some things that you think, maybe it could be a little bit tricky. I would definitely say their style of play will translate to any sort of a weather condition, all that type of stuff. But they have got to find a playmaker on the outside. And like I was just talking about, I feel like they might already have it on their roster because Coach Franklin does a great job of going out and getting some underrated players. I mean, he always has really good skill position players, and he's going to motivate them to play at their very, very best. And, something else that Penn State does a great job with is pass rush. So far, it hasn't been great, only 4 sacks on the season. But as they play up against a better competition, when teams will have to also throw the football down the field on Penn State, expect for them to start to generate more and more sacks. So I think that if you look at the core of their team, I think that they can make some noise in the playoffs if they get there. But They are going to have to identify some playmakers on the outside if they want to be a realistic threat to beat some of these upper echelon teams, especially coming from the SEC. Number 8 is going to be Oregon. Their strength of schedule is currently ranked number 89. So far, they beat Idaho and Boise State. Those were two very close games. And then they also beat Oregon State. They actually blew them out. Things are just starting to kind of turn on for Oregon at this point in the season. So we'll see how much can they click moving forward. Their remaining strength of schedule is ranked number 35. And Dylan Gabriel transferring in to Oregon, we thought that they would have just this explosive offense. We haven't seen a whole lot of that so far. Again, outside of that Oregon State game, the biggest question mark, as far as I'm concerned, has been with that offensive line. They haven't done a great job just as far as running or, opening up any running lanes, but they've also given up more sacks so far this season than they did all of last season. Dylan Gabriel has been sacked 6 times. That's very, very concerning for this sort of an offense. And, man, Jordan James has ran the football 44 times. The next running back, or, the running back with the next most amount of carries is going to be Noah Washington. He only has 27 carries. So the question is going to be, can they sustain throughout this entire season, and will their game translate really not even to the playoffs, but even just in the Big Ten when teams are going to run the football at them and they're going to have to establish some sort of a running game, and they're going to have to do that in some very cold climates. I don't think that Oregon is a real playoff threat by any means, but I do have them right here at number 8 just because this isn't the deepest year for college football, and it's probably always like this, but it just seems like, man, there's really only, I would say, maybe 6 or 7 teams that have a realistic shot to win this whole thing. That would also be another one of the differences between the college football playoff model at this point and what the NFL playoff model is. In the NFL, all those teams will have a legitimate chance to win if they get in. It's just not that much of a difference, even from the very best team that will be picking dead last in the NFL draft versus the team that's picking first. Everyone in the NFL can play. They can all coach. They're all kind of, on an even playing field from that perspective. College, it really ain't the same. So we'll see. But I just think that Oregon, in all honesty, man, I do not have a whole lot of faith in them, maybe even making it to the playoffs. But this is going to be about who do I feel like at this point in the season, based off of their body of work and all that good stuff, that I feel like are the top 10 teams. So I've got Oregon at number 8. Number 7 for me is going to be Ohio State. Some of y'all will be a little bit surprised that I have them this low on my list, but their strength of schedule is ranked number 131. That's almost dead last in all of FBS. They've played Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. So Marshall will be the best team by far that they've faced. And Marshall is absolutely horrible. So whenever you look at their numbers, yeah, they look great, but they have not proven it versus anybody. And they have a remaining strength of schedule of number 18. So it's going to get a whole lot more difficult for them. And I would not be surprised if they fall to somebody. Now, it ain't going to be from a lack of talent. They might have the most talented roster in all of college football. It's at least top 3. They're loaded everywhere. But what I've noticed is, again, it's all about that front 7 play on both sides. I think that their front 7 on defense is really good, especially those starters. But as they kind of get into their depth, there is a major drop off there. And it's not from a talent perspective. I don't know if those players just don't know how to play necessarily, but they just aren't like nasty and dogs like we've seen from some of these other teams and, programs that we will talk about that, their second and even third levels, or second and even third strings. You still see that pop, right? With for some reason with the Buckeyes, I've seen those guys kind of getting blocked, kind of getting pushed around, and that should not be happening versus a schedule like this. Almost everything that they've done has mostly come from their starters. So that's a little bit concerning for me, but I do think that they have a really good 1-2 punch with their running backs. Quinton Junkins is averaging like 9 yards per carry, and then Travion Henderson, he's right around that same mark. But I haven't been overly impressed with the way that their offensive line is opening up those holes. I think that that's a little bit of an issue. Also, the pass protection hasn't been stellar against absolutely horrible competition. I'm not going to say that it's been bad either. You would just expect for Ohio State with that roster to absolutely dominate these teams. And I haven't not really seen them doing that. So my whole point is to say this. Ohio State will be the first team that we're talking about today that I really, truly feel like could actually win a national title. But for whatever reason, I feel like Ryan Day just doesn't get these really talented rosters up to the level that they need to play and win a championship. We'll see if things will change this year, but we just won't know until they actually get to face up against somebody with a pulse. Next at number 6, I have Ole Miss. And y'all can see their numbers look absolutely phenomenal. I think that they are a really good team, very talented roster, but so far their strength of schedule is ranked number 125, and then their remaining strength of schedule is ranked number 23. they've played up against Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, and Georgia Southern. So, I mean, that's pretty much all AA ball clubs, right? I mean, pretty much all of them. So, yeah, while they have looked very impressive, you got to see them get a challenge. But I do think that because their roster is so talented, just because I know what I've seen from them playing in the SEC, I understand what to expect from them. I think that Jackson Dart is a baller. Their offensive line has looked really, really good. And I think that they've, pretty much done what they've had to do at will. They haven't shown a whole lot on offense. So, I like that about their team. I do have some question marks about how real is their rush defense, because, I mean, it looks great at this point. But once they face up against some teams that got some big bodies up front in the SEC, how are they gonna respond to that? That's gonna be my biggest thing. But I think that they are a for real team, y'all. I really do. A lot of folks will want to sleep on Ole Miss, but I think that Lane Kiffin is. I think he's getting things together there. Another question is going to be, how do they perform with all these transfer portal players? Because a lot of the talent that they have in right now came from that portal. If they lose, right, if they face any sort of anything at all off the field, any of that, right, if they have any problems inside of that locker room, how will they be able to respond to that is going to be huge. It's a really, really long season. And if Kiffin wants this team to have an opportunity to win the whole doggone thing, he's going to have to make sure that they can, bond well. And that's something I'm not following Ole Miss nearly close enough to know how good they are with that. But I would say for sure that they can beat anybody on any given Saturday, just based off of what I've seen from them so far. They are the real deal. Next at number 5, I have Georgia. So far, their strength of schedule is ranked number 43, but their remaining strength of schedule is number 1. So they've got a gauntlet coming up. And so far, they have played up against Clemson, Tennessee Tech, and Kentucky. Now, some of y'all will ask, why do you have Georgia so far down on this list? Or some of y'all think I'm being a homer, or just because I hate Georgia or I'm crazy. But first and foremost, take a look at their rushing offense. It's number 84, which is going to be the lowest out of anyone in my top 10. And then their rushing defense is ranked number 42. That's going to be another one of the lower ones out of my entire top 10. This is not by mistake that this is happening, okay? Georgia has some problems up front. I saw it in the first half versus Clemson. And in all honesty, I'll say this. If Clemson had a quarterback that played with some confidence, if they didn't come into that, especially, that quarterback, if he would have came into the game, if they all would have came into that game with confidence to play for 60 minutes, if they had a little bit more depth, I think that Clemson would have won that game. The ultimate X factor was in Georgia's depth that wore Clemson down. But if you go back, if you watch the first maybe 2.5 quarters, what you're going to see is a Clemson team being dominant on both fronts. And that speaks volumes about where Georgia is actually at, because while Clemson does have a solid front, I don't think that it might be maybe top 10. And if it's top 10, it's 10. But it's not that dominant, with their defense, and their offensive line, I don't think is anywhere near. Might be maybe top 15, okay? Georgia is not getting too much of a pass rush. And, they're not doing a good job of moving people off of the football either. But if you also really, I think the game that really tells the whole tale is that Kentucky game. And people keep on just saying, listen, Kirby does this every single year. You know what I mean? And they're just almost laughing when they say hey, listen, Kirby's good for it. He's going to make sure that Georgia comes up out of that game hungry, and they're going to be out for blood. And, they might just run the tables, and they're going to mollywop everybody for the rest of the year. I say that is such a stupid and lazy take. It's ridiculous. That just lets me know that, hey, you don't pay attention to what the heck is going on. Watch that Kentucky game again. It's not just for one half. It's for 60 minutes. Both of their fronts are not just getting beat. They're getting whipped. Georgia has problems. They have very, very serious problems. And that's why their offensive numbers don't look good. And, their defensive numbers look, they look okay from, as a whole, because their passing numbers look better. And a lot of that really has to do with, their pass rush isn't spectacular, but I think that their pass rush might take a small step forward from last season. So, and, I also think that their secondary still is getting away with a whole lot of holding calls and pass interference calls that just never happens. But look, all in all, y'all, listen. Georgia is a very, very talented team. We talked about the Buckeyes, right? They are, those two teams are definitely going to be top 3 rosters in the entire country for sure. But you have to be focused. It takes more than just having talent. You've got to have, everything has to come together right for you to be able to win a national title. Now, can Georgia make the playoffs? I would say, yeah, of course. They've got a really good shot to do it. But if you look at the gauntlet that they have coming up, because this weekend, I think Alabama is going to expose Georgia a little bit more. People are still going to be hanging on to hope, like, oh man, yeah, no, Alabama's just really good. Georgia can't be that bad. But some people are going to start to see it. Some people will look at it a little bit closer and they'll say, well, you know what? Maybe Georgia just isn't that good. Maybe it's not 2021. Maybe it's not 2022. Hey, it's actually 2024, and you have to bring it every single year. I think that type of talk will start to be kind of whispered a little bit more after this weekend. But I think that they can make it, right? But they're going to have to not only beat Alabama, they're going to have to go to Austin and beat Texas. They're going to go to Oxford and beat Ole Miss. Oh, yeah. By the way, that's the week before they see our Volunteers in Athens. It's not far-fetched to think that Georgia could lose 2 to 3 games this season, maybe even 3 to 4. And if that happens, they're not going to make it to the playoffs. So they're going to have to get things to kind of gel together a lot better. And it starts with their running game, and it starts with stopping that run. And it's almost shocking, even for me, to say that a Georgia team is not good in those two categories, because historically, that's what they've always been really, really good at. And that's what, they pretty much worked off of. But we'll see. I mean, again, I think this Alabama game will tell us a lot about who Georgia really, really is. And if they come out and if they take care of business in Tuscaloosa, I will move them up a little bit more on my list, because, hey, maybe everyone was right. Maybe they were just kind of sleepwalking through that game. Maybe they were playing with their food, and they were playing with it to such a crazy extent that they were able to get manhandled by a team that shouldn't even be on the same field with them. Or, I would say maybe 2.5 or 1.5 teams, because Kentucky and Clemson did it for one half as well. But let's go on to the next one right here. And next at number 4, I'm going to have Alabama. So they've got the 114th ranked strength of schedule at this point. Their remaining strength of schedule is number 8. So far, they played up against Western Kentucky, South Florida, and Wisconsin. And I've got them at this spot because if you look at their numbers, it's pretty balanced, okay? Things look good, and it's not just about the numbers that you're looking at right here, but if you were to look at their actual stats, I think that they do a really good job of mixing it up, getting the football in different people's hands. The offensive line has looked, I would say, pretty good throughout the entire season. Now, versus South Florida, that game was close up until about, like the fourth quarter. But Alabama was missing their 2 starting tackles. That does make you question, how good is the depth actually on this team? Because it shouldn't be that much of a drop-off for you to struggle versus a South Florida team that Alabama should be a whole lot better than. But at the same time, man, Saban struggled with them last season. I think that, part of the reason for that was because Jalen Milroe was not playing, but I think that Jalen Milroe this year, he's playing, he's playing well, okay? He's taking care of the football. I think he has 8 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, and he can also use his legs. I don't know if I could go as far as to say that he's a baller at quarterback, but at least he's a dual threat. He's a real threat to either pass the football or to run it. So that puts a lot of stress on any defense that's trying to game plan for him. So, I think that they've got a whole lot going for them from that perspective. But at the same time, y'all, even with as talented as Alabama's roster is, I still kind of feel like there's a little bit too much respect being given to them based off of what's happened in previous seasons. So, I do have them very high up on my, on my top 10. But like I said earlier, man, it's not necessarily, it's really more so to do with, I would say maybe like a lack of a whole lot of good quality depth throughout the entire league at this point. But yeah, I do think that Alabama is a very, very good team. I think that they're dangerous, but we'll see what they do this weekend versus them doggone dogs down in Tuscaloosa. But, I would say that they are a team that should make it to the playoffs. What will they do once they get there? I think that they've got a really good shot. Their game should be able to translate. Again, you're looking at their Russian defensive numbers. It's not great. They've got to get that improved if they want to be able to beat some of these upper echelon teams. This really all depending on how the rest of their season kind of plays out and what their matchups look like. I could see them being a team that could make it far if they get the correct matchups in the playoffs, or I could see them being a team that could be, maybe one and done if they just get the wrong team that can run the ball down their throats, at least up until this point in the season. We'll see how things change as the season goes on. Next at number 3, I have Miami, and so far their strength of schedule has been ranked number 88. Their remaining strength of schedule is going to be number 48. So far they played up against Florida, Florida A&M, Ball State, and South Florida. So really the only, team that they played up against was Florida. Florida's not that good. But at the same time, you got to give them credit for going down to the Swamp in the opening game when Florida was playing at their absolute best. Everything, all the hope and all that type of stuff was still there. That makes a difference. I'm telling you, it makes a difference when you play a team in the schedule, because all these guys should pretty much be going, I wouldn't say all of them, maybe some of them will be playing at their best earlier in the schedule, especially Florida, because I mean, they're starting to lose hope. So if you see teams beating up on them at this point in the season, it almost doesn't really even count because, I mean, they know that Coach Napier is about to get fired, all those types of things. But outside of that, whenever I look at Miami playing, their offensive line is legitimate. It's really, really good. I mean, whether it's pass blocking, whether it's run blocking, they look great. It might be the best offensive line that I've seen so far. Now, again, they haven't faced up against the best competition. They did kill South Florida that we talked about. Alabama kind of struggled with them. But as we also said, I mean, you know, Miami was fully healthy as far as I know, and Alabama just didn't really have that many people. Or I'm sorry, they had two of their tackles out for that game. And I think that they had some other pretty key guys sitting out for that one. So that isn't necessarily the ultimate gauge for is Miami, you know, better than Alabama. I wouldn't say that. But their offensive line has been extremely, extremely impressive to me. They're doing a great job of running that football. And, man, their defense swarms. They play with an attitude. It ain't quite that old U, but I think that it's starting to get there. I think that, you know, they could end up there by the end of this season. Cam Ward, I think he should probably be like the Heisman Trophy leader at this point. I mean, he's playing absolutely lights out. Now, he will kind of give you some bad passes every now and then because he's a gunslinger, right? So you got to watch out for that with them. That could maybe be something that hurts them on down the road. But I think that they can establish that running game early. You know, I think that they can trust Cam Ward to get them out of a bind or to go out and win them a game on the outside. They should be able to win those matchups. And he can also use his legs. I think that he is a baller through and through. But also their defense looks for real. I really do like Miami at this point in the season. We'll have to see how they look as everything just, you know, kind of keeps on moving forward. But yeah, I think that Miami is a team that's being slept on way too much. I think that they are for real, for real. Next at number 2, I have the Tennessee Volunteers. Y'all take a look at those numbers. Obviously, man, number 1 in efficiency. I think that that's very, very impressive. Also, number 4 in total offense, number 6 in rushing offense, number 1 in total defense, and number 2 in rushing defense. I actually went back and forth on who should I put at number 1 and number 2. But ultimately, I decided to, I settled on Tennessee at number 2, for just a few reasons. But I think that really number 1 and number 2 could be interchangeable, maybe even number 3. I think that the top 3 teams are in a different category at this point in the season. But Tennessee's strength of schedule so far is ranked number 53, and their remaining strength of schedule is number 11. So far, Tennessee has played UT Chattanooga, NC State, Kent State, and Oklahoma. I mean, look, Tennessee has probably been one of the more tested teams, and especially in the SEC, right? People, continue to talk about, well, Tennessee hasn't played up against anybody. They keep on trying to move that goalpost further and further back. Say, well, Tennessee went out and beat UT Chattanooga. Let's see what they do versus NC State. Tennessee blows them out. Okay, well, let's see what they do versus Oklahoma. Tennessee blows them out. No, that's not good enough. We'll see what you do versus Arkansas, versus Alabama. It's going to keep on moving. I promise you that. And I don't even care. Sleep on us. Sleep on my Volunteers as much as you want. This team is for real. For Tennessee to be able to go down to Norman with 2 of their tackles out, okay, for most of that game. Starting left tackle was out for the entire game, but then the starting right tackle, he was out for, I would say, maybe about 2.5 quarters of that game. For Tennessee to be able to go on the road, okay, in a hostile SEC environment and be able to win the way that they did while Alabama was, barely able to beat, average at best South Florida team without their 2 starting tackles. I think that speaks volumes about the depth of this team, about the mindset of this team, and not just that, but the way that Tennessee was able to win that game, running the football. I mean, ran the ball almost 50 times in that game. Defense stepped up in a major way. I think that this is a Tennessee team that is built to last. It's built to not just make it to the playoffs, but could be competing for the SEC championship, could win the SEC title, and could get that first round bye in the playoffs, and could run the doggone tables and go 16-0. It just looks like that team. Also, because we have a baller at quarterback. Nico Iamaleava is the truth. He hasn't had to do too much so far this season, but trust me when I tell you, he's got it in his arsenal. He's just been holding it back because we're going to win however we need to win, baby. We don't need to put up a whole bunch of numbers and stats and things like that. Nico's coming. The rest of their offense is coming. Wait your time, okay? You will get to see it. Some of y'all will get to see it versus your team. So y'all better watch y'all's mouths whenever you talk about these Tennessee Volunteers because it is for real, I can promise you, man, playing on a completely different level. Everyone's playing together. It just feels like a really, really special season. And, again, just would not be surprised to see this Tennessee team not only in the playoffs, but with that first round bye heading into this whole thing. And at number 1, I've got the Texas Longhorns. As y'all can see, they've got some pretty solid numbers right here, but I don't even think that the numbers always fully tell the tale. Like I told you, I do a whole lot of eyeball tests, right? Like I am going to look at those numbers, several different numbers, but I'm also going to watch you and see how do you actually play? What are you holding back? How many players are you rotating in these games? So for Texas, with the strength of schedule thus far of number 63 and with a remaining strength of schedule of number 19, they faced Colorado State. They went to the Big House and faced Michigan. They've also played they've also played UTSA and Louisiana Monroe. So not the best schedule, but I think that their win, in Ann Arbor, I think that was impressive the way that they were able to do it, especially seeing that USC couldn't go up there. A lot of folks have USC as a potential playoff team. So I think that just kind of speaks to the, real quality of this Texas team that's very, very versatile. And I can say that about really maybe all of the top 4, maybe even, I would say mostly top 4 teams on my list. They're all very versatile. They can beat you a number of different ways. And something else that I love about Texas is we're seeing that they're deep at the quarterback spot. Not too many teams can say that. Arch Manning, I feel like, could operate the offense at the exact same level, or at least very close to it, as Quinn Ewers. Now, some of the question marks for Texas is what the heck's going on with their rushing offense. It's not as explosive. So they're going to have to find ways to kind of get that going. But I know that Sark is a really good coach, and he can do that. But up front, man, their offensive line is stout. Their running backs run hard. I think that they play with an edge, with the chippiness. They've got some ridiculously good wide receivers. I love their, their offensive scheme where they bunch up. They're going to be able to, get to their mismatches and things like that, and kind of, get the defense playing or looking in the wrong spots. So their offense can be very, very deadly from that perspective. But also, if you look at their defense, I think that they've got a solid pass rush. I think that they do a solid job in stopping that run. Again, very versatile. Their second level, their guys are big, they're strong, they're fast, they're physical. They look good in coverage. And then, their secondary pieces, all those guys, man, it's been lockdown coverage, I would say, for the most part throughout this entire season. So I think that Texas is for real. And, it's going to be interesting to see what happens as some of their tougher games are coming up. You can see that their, strength of schedule that's left isn't necessarily that great compared to the other teams in the SEC. So they might have, one of the easiest paths to getting to the SEC championship, but it's not just about that SEC championship. It's also about what do you do once you get into the playoffs? You know what I'm saying? Just because it is a whole new season at that point. But this is my top 10, y'all. Again, we got Texas at number 1, Tennessee's at 2, Miami's at 3, 4, Alabama, 5 is UGA, 6 is Ole Miss, 7, Ohio State, 8 is Oregon, 9 is Penn State, and number 10 is Utah. That's my top 10 at this point, heading into week 5 of this season. Please give me yours down in the comment section. As always, thank y'all so much for sticking all the way to the very, very end. Please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your friends, family, and other volunteer fans. We'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks. Peace.